All right, so today is all about glaze making. We are going to understand what is in that bucket, what makes up glaze, and then we're also going to compare making clay in a recipe as it is to making glaze in a recipe. Once we understand the basics of what makes a ceramic glaze, then we'll go ahead and get into that bucket and figure out how to prepare the glaze and how to actually apply it, then what methods we can use to apply it onto our clay, make sure that it's even, that it turns out the way we want it to, and so we're using the proper technique to do that. So that's what today is going to be all about. All right, so let's talk about what glaze is. Glaze is in those big tubs, those big 5-gallon buckets or bigger. And they usually have that cover on the top. They got a recipe on the side. You know inside of that when you open the cover that you're gonna find glaze. Glaze is what goes on the outside of raw clay that's been fired once in a bisque firing, and it goes right on that clay and soaks into it. And typically speaking, glaze is liquid glass. So it is a chemical mixture that goes into that clay, and when it's fired at a certain temperature, it conforms to the shape of that piece and becomes glass, okay? A formed glass on the outside of the clay. What's better than that is that many of the materials that are in the glaze that form that layer on the outside, many of those materials are the same materials that you find in the clay. So as those mixtures come together in that final firing, you could probably make a case that that whole thing becomes a piece of glass when you get done. And no longer is it clay, no longer is it a ceramic at that point, but it becomes pure glass. Glaze, when you look inside that bucket, it is a bunch of chemicals. And those chemicals come from the earth. And so if you have chemistry class, guess what? You know a lot about what glaze is, because the periodic table has a lot of words on it that have to do with the glazes that we use. Some of them are directly related to glazes we use, such as lithium, barium, things of that nature that are alkaline earth metals. So it's directly related. It's so cool. Everything comes from the ground. It comes together and kind of forms all these things. Each glaze is made up of absolutely 3 things. Now, there could be any number of anything from 3 different ingredients in a glaze to 16 different ingredients in a glaze. But glaze in itself has to have these 3 things. 1, it has to have a glass former, okay? Now, glass former, of course, is silica. Silica is the element that we use in order to formulate that glass. A lot of other things come from the actual clay that might be in the glaze itself, and a lot of other things that help support that glass forming, but silica is one of the main elements that we're going to use. The next thing is fluxes. Just like when we made the clay, we had to have that flux in with the clay in order to fuse those molecules together and make sure under temperature that they were able to fuse at a temperature that we can hit, right? Because without that flux, we'd have to get a kiln up to like 4,000 degrees, right? In order to fuse that together. But because flux is in there, it lowers that temperature down to a temperature that we can reach in our kiln in order to get that fusion to happen. Same thing with the glazes. We need a flux in the glazes in order for the glaze to be able to melt over top of our clay and turn into that glass. So glass former and flux. Now, if we don't have the third thing on there, everything's going to just turn to that liquid. It's going to flux into that liquid and run right off. So we got to have a stabilizer. A stabilizer is what keeps that from running off, right? It keeps that form to the correct viscosity so that it doesn't drip too far down. It only drips a little bit, stays right on that pot, right past that cooling level, and cools right there and stays there. So it's really a balance between all three of those main three parts that gives that makes a glaze successful. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare this glaze to be put on your pot, and then we're going to talk about different ways that you can apply it to your pot. So first of all, preparing it. So you see on the top all of the different colors that are available. You'll notice that that doesn't necessarily mean like paint. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the color of the chemical mixture that's suspended inside. Matter of fact, this one on the top says butter yellow. If I open that up, it looks like it's green on the inside, okay? Even though it comes out to be a really bright, beautiful yellow. Right now, it can't be used. It's been settling the entire time. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take you down and take a look at the inside. You can see that on the inside, you can see how it settled so much that the actual water is on the top, and the chemicals that make up that glaze have settled to the bottom. And the reason why, of course, is because the chemicals weigh so much more than the water does, and eventually over time they just settle. So the first thing that we need to do if we're going to use that glaze in order to put on a pot is we need to do what's called suspending. Suspending means that we have to take all of those chemicals that are right at the bottom there, and we want to suspend those all the way to the top. So over here is, tipped upside down, is our mixer. So our mixer has this chuck on the top. Inside the back of it is the key in order to take this off, and maybe I want to go clean it or something like that. I'll show you how we clean it here so you don't have to take it off, but there might be a time you need to take it off. That gets fitted right back inside that end there, just like that. That's where it kind of stays. And then this has a battery on the end that is charged right behind me up on that red shelf up there. So as I put this inside, I go all the way to the bottom. And I just go ahead and move this around a little bit and get that blended together. I know I'm done if I can get all the way to the bottom. Get that all mixed up, all mixed in, and that water goes down too. And that water just gets mixed in down there. Okay? So I bring it out, get that water mixed in, bring it all the way down to the bottom, getting all that blended in, bring that back up, bring that right back down the bottom. I have to make sure this is all really good. So I'm going to go over here to the water, and I'm just going to mix it a few times in the water like that. And that cleans everything off of the end. I can flip it back upside down, way back there, and set that right on the battery, and flip that upside down. And what I have here is just a bowl that I made before. And this bowl is a sponge right now. It has been bisque fired, and so it is ready to absorb any moisture that hits it at all. There's a few things that are good and a few things that are bad about this being a bisque fired piece. The first thing that's good is it's going to absorb the glaze really well, deep down into the pores, and so there won't be much of this that's not going to be covered in glass. The other thing is it absorbed so much, and it continues to absorb even when it's full. So if the cells of this are full of that glaze and you still left it in there, it would still absorb on top of that layer. That's how powerful it is as far as being able to suck that glaze up. So knowing that, you have to make sure when you dip it that you do it quickly so you get the absorption but you don't get over absorption. So I'm going to grab this bowl on the top here, and this is easy to do with a piece that's lighter like this, and we'll talk about what to do with heavier pieces. So this one's going to go down into the glaze and come right back up. Just taking my sponge on the top, just give it a little twist like that, push the sponge into it a little bit. So you see that clay then is exposed just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch up that edge on both sides. Then I know that it's not going to get down to that kiln shelf. It's drying right now at this point, and that's how fast the glaze will actually suck in. Matter of fact, it's dry right now. So all the glaze has sucked into that clay, and I can grab it with my hands now, and it's dry. Brushing is something you want to avoid if you can, and the reason why is because brushing can lead to opening in areas that don't get covered. And if you think about a brush, the function of a brush is to go over the surface and not to really apply something to it, but to actually pull something across the surface. So when you're brushing glaze on, you're pulling that glaze across, and you're actually not allowing the glaze to sink into the clay as much as you'd like. So the first thing I'm going to do, I got a clean container here, and I have my glaze down here. I have it all mixed up, so I'm just going to go ahead, take my clear container, dip it in there, get a little bit, wipe it off on the side, and just like that, bring it on over. So that's my little bit of glaze that I have. I don't have a whole lot. I can always get more, and ready to go. So first things, when you work with the glaze, one thing you'll notice is how quickly the glaze is absorbed by the clay, okay? So when I put it over the top, and I put it on as liquid like I just did, look at that. Immediately, you can see it lighter in that spot. It's dry already. That you're basically just applying the glaze in one stroke, and what I'm going to recommend to you is do a stroke overlapping and make X's, okay? So I'm coming down in the areas, I'm filling my brush up as much as I can with the glaze, and I dip every single time. So I'm dipping and applying, dipping and applying, so you'll never go over that area twice, and you'll never kind of rub back and forth. You're just making X's as you go. So as I come down here, I'm going to come down low, I'm going to grab some more, I'm going to go over and make an X like that. And you'll notice I'm using a brush that is kind of a fan brush, in a sense that it has a lot of bristles. It can hold a lot of glaze, so that's important. Make sure that your brush is one that's going to hold a lot of the glaze that you want. Don't use a brush that's meant for just like a little finishing brush. So once I have that done all the way around, methodically going once around, I'm going to start probably at the handle again, because that's a nice point to start at. And then methodically I'll go all the way around one more time, and then we'll check and see if the glaze has a good thickness to it. Right. So the last thing is clear glaze, and what the purpose of clear glaze is in a high-fired piece. Clear glaze will protect any of the colored clay that you have underneath. So if you have these mason stain slips that we made over here, if you use those on your piece, sometimes what happens, well, all the time what happens is that they're going to be matte finish, and they're going to be kind of chalky looking. They're not going to be chalky feeling, but they're going to be a matte finish like that. So it's going to look like chalk pastel. Is right down here, right by all of our large containers that we have, is a smaller 5-gallon container right here, and it is called clear gloss. So it's important to note that if you want to have that color protected and you want to have it glossy in the end, you got to put clear gloss over top of the colors that you put on there. You would put those on first before you have it bisqued, ideally. All right, before you have a bisque fired, that first firing, and then in the high temperature firing, then you would have that clear glaze over the top.